Alright, welcome back to a new TouchDesigner tutorial. And in this one, we're going to look at the new StreamDiffusion Talks by .simulate. And we're going to create some lovely Audioreactive graffiti with it. And this is not really going to be a deep dive into the talks itself, and I'm not going to show you how to install it or set it up itself. There is a video in the description by .simulate himself who explains that really well. So once you've set everything up, you can start with this tutorial. And this is going to be more about the workflow around it and kind of building a network that you can integrate this talks nicely into. And one note about that, this is just like kind of the first attempt of me to work with it. This might change over time. Yeah, what I'm getting here with StreamDiffusion is usually an FPS around 1 to 12. So that depends on a lot of things. So I'm running this on a laptop 3070. Depending on whether I'm using acceleration like TensorRT, depending on width and height, and depending on a lot of things, I'm getting a different FPS, but you know, my maximum is kind of 12. So even that is not great for exporting. So this approach is going to show you a way of working with this talks in both a real-time and a non-real-time way. So the idea is that we have this independent base here, where all the audio processing and visual processing is happening, and then we're sending one frame into StreamDiffusion, and once StreamDiffusion says, all right, I'm done processing that frame, we're sending that message back into the independent base, and then we're going one frame further, and then we're just repeating that process, and that's how we kind of building a video. But all of the setup totally works with real-time content as well. So if you do have a graphics card that is powerful enough to run at 30 FPS, you can still work nicely in this way. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So as usual, I'm just gonna go ahead and delete everything. I'm just gonna leave in my little table here, which tells me the two resolutions I usually work with. I'm gonna be working with a 4:3. I really like that format. And there's also a link in the description for you to check out some more resolutions that work really well. I'm going to start with a base component and I'm going to call that independent. I'm going to give that a color, make it a bit bigger, and right click on it and add a component time. So what that does is create a timeline just for the space. So you can see we now have this local base in here and then a time component inside of that. So by default, you have this local in your root of the project. So if you go in there, you can see you also have a time component. And everything in this project is based on this time component and the timeline on the bottom here. So what we're doing here is just create a little independent timeline. And we can make that independent by clicking this I or by going in here in time and turning on run independently. So now if I pause the main timeline, you can see everything else pauses. Kind of hard to see, but you can see it down here. But this timeline is still running nicely. So I've got my FPS set to 30. And I'm going to grab that FPS by just typing me.time.rate in here. And I'm going to set my end here to like 10,000. So I'm just copy and pasting that as a reference on the range. So now you can see we got this really long timeline that's just kind of running on its own here. Cool. So I'm just going to make this black. So it's kind of going to be not too important. One last thing that we want to do here is, as you can see, I can pause and play my main timeline, but I can't really pause and play this timeline easily. So to do that, I'm just going to add a keyboard in. I'm going to add a logic to it. And on my logic, I'm going to turn channel pre-op to toggle. So now when I press 1 on my keyboard, it's kind of like an on-off button. I'm going to add a null to it and then add a chop execute. I could technically use this channel directly on my play. That's what I want to use this for, right? When I could turn off play, you can see now our independent timeline is paused. But that kind of creates this weird cook dependency issue. So it's better to work with a chop execute here. And I'm just going to type in OP time and then .play equals val, and val is just the value coming in here, 0 or 1. So if I now press 1 on my keyboard, I can pause and play this timeline. So 1 might not be the perfect key for this. You can also pick any other key from this list. But yeah, feel free to do that in any way you like. I'm also going to set this to selective, so it's cooking less. All right, so now we've got that set up. I'm going to add the StreamDiffusion talks. I've already got that in my components on the palette. You can just drag it from your Explorer and then drag it in here. Shows me a bit of an error right now. That's all right. Generally, I'm having a bit of a hard time having two TouchDesigners running at the same time. Anyways, I'm going to add a noise here. And I'm going to use the resolutions that I've got in there. To do that, I'm just going to drag it on here and then add the brackets. I think they're called brackets, right? I don't know. 0, 0, and 0 and 1, actually. So I'm grabbing the first and the second column and the first row. So I'm going to put that in here, and then actually it's already running. By default, usually you have to start the stream and then wait for a bit. I already have that running. So you can see it works nicely, but it doesn't really do any animation. That's because our input doesn't do any animation, right? StreamDiffusion is image to image. So you can't do text to image, and you can't do text to video or anything like that. So if you want it to be animated, then you have to animate the input. So I'm just gonna do like a ABS time.seconds in here. Now you can see that works nicely. Right now the prompt is basic default banana. That's why it looks so strange. The more we go down with our step, the closer it's gonna be to our prompt, and the more it's gonna be the AI just doing its thing. It's a weird banana man in there. And the higher up we go with the step, the more close it's gonna be to our input. So that's really important to look at. So in the new version, we have all these prompt blocks and like seed blocks. We're not really gonna look at that in this video. And we're generally going to come back to this later on. I'm just going to stop the cooking here for now, and we're going to go back into the independent and create all of our input. So we're going to start with audio. I'm going to add an audio file in, and we're just going to be working with the default audio file. Right now, as you can see, it's paused. When I now press 1 on my keyboard, you can see that's working. It's very fast, actually, and you can hear that when I add an audio device out. And that's because we have real time turned off. So if I have real time turned on, then everything is just normal, right? So I am going to add a snare detection of my own making. You can easily just go to Tools and add Audio Analysis. And then input that here, turn on snare active, and then you can use a select here to select the snare or any other element that you would like to select. I'm gonna work with the snare for this example. And by the way, this component is gonna be available now on my Patreon. And I kind of like this visualization because it's nice to see how you want to set your threshold. So what we're getting out here as data is just the snare on and off, right? So I want to sort of extract 3 different types of strains from here. So one of them is going to be using the trigger. So on my trigger, I just want to sort of smooth out the signal. I want to add a release. So I don't want to have any attack, no peak length. Decay is going to be 0.1, sustain level 1, and release length 0.5. So you can see it stays for a very short time at 1, and then it's kind of fading out. I like that. So I'm going to add a null and just call this snare smooth. Then I'm going to add, with the middle mouse, a count, because we want to change the seed of noise and stuff like that. So a count is a good way to do that. So I'm going to just limit it to a very high number so we don't go into infinity. And then I'm going to call this snare seed. And then last but not least, I'm going to add a math as well as a speed and another null. And I'm going to call this snare anim. And this is going to be sort of an animation channel for, again, noise or whatever you want to use this on. So we're going to come back to that. Just for cleanness reasons, I'm going to drag, alt drag, and then just call this audio processing. And then we're going to move to our instancing and render setup. So I'm going to add a rectangle sub and then a transform. On my transform, I'm going to uniform scale this down to 0.35. And from here, I'm going to right click and add a geometry. Let's add a camera and a light as well. And add a render top to convert this into tops. So about the render top, we generally want to work with 8-bit when we're working with this AI stuff. And our resolution, we have defined that nicely here. And we kind of got to do the same thing here on the render. So our table is up here. So what we got to do is type in OP, and then // so we're going back one step, and then res, and then again 0, 0. I'm just going to copy this, paste it here, and just type in 1. So we got the same resolution. We're working with the correct resolution. Perfect. All right, we're going to continue here, but first I want to create the instances. I'm going to go to instance, turn instancing on, and let's create a noise here on which we're going to base our position. So I want to have 9 instances, so I'm going to do 9 by 1. I want this to be 32-bit float when we're working with instancing. That's quite important. I'm going to change the input smoothness to nearest pixel. I also don't want this to be monochrome because we want to have both the R and the G, so X and Y position. And I'm going to add a math as well as a null to this. And on my math, I'm going to change my ranges in a second. To see that better, I'm going to drag my position onto here, select R and G for X and Y. And now you can see why we want to rearrange it, because it's just going from 0 to 1. I want to rearrange the R, so the X. R is X. So minus 1.7 is a good value here. And now I want to also change the G, minus 0.2 to 0.2. So we don't go as high. All right. So now you can see if we change the seed, we got those nice rectangles dancing there. Right, I also want to change scale and rotation. So first off, I'm going to worry about the rotation. So I'm going to add another noise. On output, set it to just noise. Turn off monochrome. Let's change the seed. And as this is going to be rotation, I want it to go from 0 to 360. So I'm going to just change that range here. Add a null, call that rot for rotation, and put that on rotation, and select for Y, select G. So now you can see, again, when I change the seed here, they're nicely being rotated around the space. And yeah, we can just copy and paste this. Again, change the seed. And here, I'm just going to reset all parameters. We want this to be 1 and 3 on the scale. So I'm going to call this scale and put that on here. And we want to have R and G as a scale here. So you can see they're all different scales. I'm just going to I'm just going to make these all active so you can nicely pick them. On my noise free, which is driving the scale, I'm going to use my snare seed on the seed. So every time the snare hits, you can see the scales are changing randomly. And obviously you can also change period and stuff, but I'm not really going to worry about that now. For the noise, I'm going to go ahead and use my snare anim on the TZ. So you can see it's kind of being pushed around once the snare hits. Then I'm going to add a level to this. And on my level, I want to control the opacity using my snare smooth. And then you can see it's only being displayed when the snare hits. I think that was kind of interesting. Another thing that I'm going to do here, first off, I'm going to turn off all these viewers to save some processing. And I'm going to do mirror here. It's generally an effect I don't use that often because it's just overused. But in this case, I think it works very nicely. So actually one thing we might want to do, because the left is going to just be mirrored on the right. So what we can do here is just change our ranges from like minus 1.7 to 0, or maybe like 0.5 or something. So they're basically only like everything is happening on the left, because we don't need the right, as that's just going to be mirrored off the left, a mirror of the left, if that makes sense. All right, so that doesn't really look like graffiti yet. And generally, we want to be as close to what we want at the end without using StreamDiffusion already in TouchDesigner. So let's make that look more like graffiti. So we can do that with a displace and a noise. On my noise, I'm going to just set it to noise again and turn off monochrome, go down for harmonic gain and to 1.5 for period. And in this case, I just want to animate this independently of the snare. So alias time.seconds times 0.025, very slowly. Let's input that into the displays and go down the displays way to 0.15 on both axes. So you can see that already looks closer to what we have going on at the end, right? Let's look at color now. So first off, we're going to look at fill color, and we're going to just do that with a lookup as usual. Lookup and ramp, and on my ramp, I'm just going to do like a red here, sort of an intense red color here, and for the whites, I'm going to do like an intense blue color. Then we can maybe already add an out just to see what's happening here. So we're going to come back inside of this base, but for now, I'm just going to send that data out, and we're going to interchange the input here and just bypass that noise. Right, let's see what's happening now. It's still creating bananas, so that's not really what we want, right? So I'm going to just set up a little prompt network here by adding a text that. .simulate shows in this video, you can just check that out. You can also add a text component to really have it update in real time, but we're not really going to worry about that now. I'm just going to write in like a graffiti art and wall. I'm going to add some more stuff later on. I'm just going to call this prompt 0. Let's add a convert. So we're converting it to a table, and then add a null, which we're going to call x prompt, because that's the one that we want to use on here. So I'm just going to drag it on there, and again, just add 0 and 0 in brackets. All right, so now if I hit play, you can now see that it looks like graffiti already. So that's pretty cool, right? I really like that. And you really have to look at the step here. So usually I would say something around 20 is a good value, because it's a kind of a good balance between input and AI created content. So if you go down a lot to like step 2, you can see there's barely anything you can see off the input. And if we go to like 30, then it's too little change, I would say. So yeah, 20 I think, or like 18 or something is really good, because you still want to really see what's going on in your original content. All right, so we're going to come back to that. What I would like to have now is some outlines here, because often in graffiti we have these kind of outlines. Again, I'm just going to kind of bypass that. So to add outlines, I'm going to just add an edge and change my strength to 5 on all of these. 5 on strength and sample step. And you can see it doesn't look that great, right? So to make it look better, we can first blur it. And I'm going to set my blur to filter size 10. And then it's going to be, yeah, it looks better. Not like, you know, we don't have these weird kind of artifacts, but it's kind of too washed out for me. So to change that, what we can do is add a limit and then quantize it round value step 1. So that adds these really nice kind of clean lines, but now they're kind of, you can see if I press 1 to pause my independent timeline, you can kind of see we have this aliasing going on. So in that case, I don't want to add anti-aliasing or just another blur. So maybe both can work. So we can either go up to ultra here. That doesn't really do enough for my taste. I'm just going to do it with a blur and then do like 3 or 4, something like that. I think that looks pretty all right. You can see, again, as I said before, this already looks kind of like graffiti. And for me, that's important that we don't let the AI do everything, but we already create something that looks similar to what we want at the end. I want this to be colored. We could technically just change the edge color here, and I'm just going to do that. You can see now, because of the limit, it looks really weird. So I would just keep it as white here, and then use a lookup to change the colors. So we can do that nicely with a constant instead of a ramp. So I'm just going to copy this constant, go down with the alpha. And here now in the second constant, we can set any color that we like. So I'm just going to add a layout, input this as a second input, scale resolution, and then we can input that here. We got this color nicely put onto the white parts. Then I'm going to add a composite, put that into the second input, change it to over. And then I don't want to change these inputs because I might want to do bypass. So instead I'm going to do swap operation order. So now let's go back and see what difference that makes. Yeah, I think it looks better than before. Okay, it's not animated because I pressed 1. But yeah, it's more interesting, I think, personally. Okay, so the next step is that I might want to break this up even more because there's a lot of sort of areas now that are just like one color. So to break it up even more, I would just add another noise. I'm going to change my period to 2, harmonics to 1, exponent down to 0. And then on my seed, I'm actually just going to go ahead and use my snare seed. So you can see that changes every time. And also we just want this to be noise, not this input as well. Then I'm going to use an edge again. I'm going to change my strength to 10, sample step maybe like 6 and 6. That's looking all right. And then what we can do is just use a comp. And actually, I'm just going to change my edge color to black and put that here and do the same thing as before. Do over and swap operation order. Or obviously, you can use other operations, but it's kind of the easiest, most straightforward. And now if we look here, we can see there's a bit more variation in dynamics in there because we added black lines in between. All right, so that's cool. We're pretty much done in here. Obviously, there's many things you can add more. Feel free, really, and I encourage you to do a lot more in here. Don't just follow what I do. There's so many things you can play around with. Another thing that I want to check out now is adding noise. One thing you might notice is that around this shape or color here, there's just black. So maybe you want a bit more. You want the AI to do a bit more around it. So to do that, you could either go down with the step, but I generally wouldn't recommend that because it's also gonna change the shapes and colors here a lot. So instead, what we can do is work with noise again. You know, noise is just the most important operator, really. So there's two ways of working with the noise here. You can already see what's happening if we just add noise in. There's obviously too much happening, but that kind of shows you nicely what's going on. So we have two sort of types of noise that we can add here before the input. So one would be input plus noise, and the other one is to multiply that noise. So if we multiply it, you can see the noise is only there wherever we have a non-black shape, right? Where we have our colors going on. So in this case, I would just want to set this to random, actually. And you can already see there's a lot going on in here now. There's a lot more detail. It doesn't look great, though, because it's just too much. So in this case, I just want to go down with the amplitude to like 1 and the offset maybe to like 0.8. So it's brighter. And now you can see maybe like the difference, right? This looks very clean, if that's what you like. But if you want to have more detail in it and want it to look more kind of painted or something, you can really nicely see here that adding noise really makes a difference. So this is one of the noises that we can add. It's sort of, add noise where there's already content. And the other way is to add noise generally. This is multiplying noise and this is adding noise. And for adding noise, I'm just going to go down with the period to like 0.01. It's basically like having it set to random. But in this case, I can animate it if I like. So you could do the same thing here, obviously. So you can either have this monochrome or non-monochrome. It actually doesn't make that huge of a difference. And again, I would greatly change the amplitude here. So I'm going to go down to like 0.02 and 0.02 on the offset as well. And that's just going to add a bit of noise. It's kind of hard to see now. Maybe I'm going to add the amplitude. But yeah, it also kind of creates this annoying watermark-ish thing down there. So maybe that's something that you don't like. But generally, especially now when I play and we go like down to something like this, you can see we have these kind of artifacts, or there's just stuff happening, even though there's no content coming in. So otherwise it would just look plain black. So, with noise you can just add these little extras and you can be surprised by what the AI does with it. Okay, so that's all the kind of pre-processing. One main thing that we really need to look at now is how to do the frame by frame thing, right? So I'm gonna just pause this again. We could either grab a null from here and we can see this frame count, which is going up every time a new frame is being processed. But we also have these callbacks, and that's a really nice way to work with this. So I'm just going to go into on receive frame before return. And what we want to do here is we want to talk to this timeline and just add a frame every time Stable Diffusion has received a frame, so is done processing a frame pretty much. So I'm gonna hit 1 so we don't play this, because when we're doing that frame by frame thing, play should be turned off. So this should not be going. So everything should be static and only be moved by this frame. So let's just type in the expression that we need here is op independent, then /local /time, and then we just need to hit .frame plus equal 1. All right, so what's now happening, as you can see, we're moving through it frame by frame. So we don't miss any frames, right? Because if it's just playing in there, and StreamDiffusion is like, if it's running with 30 FPS in there, and StreamDiffusion is running with like 2 FPS, then basically we're only ever getting AI output of every 15 frame or so. So to not skip or lose any frames, this is a really nice way to work. So that's pretty much all we need to do here, is just add this little expression onto the callbacks. And then, we have set that up nicely. So yeah. And one thing you can really play around with as well is the seed. So it's gonna really matter a lot which seed you take. And for me personally, I like to just type them in here manually instead of using this random value here, or just typing -1 to have a random seed. Because once I see, okay, this is a really nice seed, then I usually do like create a list of text dad or something with all the seeds that I personally like. So that will make a huge difference. And you can add several seeds, you can add several like prompts, you can add several steps here as well, and really try out a lot of things here. Simulate really made a good job with variety here and all these different options. So yeah. And another thing would be how to export this now. So usually what I do is just add an HSV adjust as well as a level after this. So I'm really more in control of the outcome. And then I'm gonna add a movie file out. And on my movie file out, just like in the Stable Diffusion video, I'm gonna change this to stop frame movie. And then change my movie pixel format and audio bitrate, because I wanna use the audio that's in here. So I'm just gonna call this audio. So we know it's independent, it's called audio, so all we need to do is just write an independent /audio, and then it's going to be exported using that audio, frame by frame as well. And it's going to sound good at the end, it's just like a normal video. All right, so one thing we want to add here is the expression op movie file out 1 .par.add frame .pulse parentheses. So basically we're telling it to push this add frame button every time a frame is finished processing. And this is only has an effect if we hit record. So now I'm gonna hit record, and now you can see it works nicely. One thing that you can also see is that this is just kind of static. So that's why I added, why I changed this to not just random, but simplex 3D, just left it there, because we can now animate this. ABS time seconds times maybe 0.1. And now what that does is it's going to animate our noise a bit. So when there's no input, you can see it kind of still slightly moves. So it looks more like an actual animation and not just, So I don't know, it looks more organic in a way. I mean, you can do that. You can just leave it away to have it be cleaner. It's just one thing that you can do. One other thing that I want to add here is chromatic aberration component that I made. You can get that on my Patreon. What that does is, what you can see here, just kind of changing the colors. It's based on a shader. And, you can add any kind of post effects, like any effects here, bloom or whatever you want to change the input of StreamDiffusion. So you really, like, your imagination or knowledge is the limit here. And yeah, also in here, really feel free to mess around. And this is just one example, right? We can go back to our prompt and we can change it and add more stuff here. We can do like eyes, faces, grunge, anything like that, text maybe. And now you can see there's some eyes in there. And I think it looks even better than before. And yeah, as I said in the beginning, like, it makes sense to create something that already looks close to what you want to have the AI make at the end. But obviously you could go crazy and completely do something different as we had before. So we can just go back to the banana, and then we can see it tries to make a banana out of that. But obviously that doesn't work too well because what we're inputting doesn't look like a banana at all. But it's interesting, right? So always feel free to really mess around with this. There's no right or wrong way of doing this, and I generally urge you not to just do what everybody else does, but just mess around, try all kinds of things. It's so powerful to use the StreamDiffusion tool inside of TouchDesigner, and you can, any of your projects pretty much, you can create in here and just send them into StreamDiffusion. You just got to be aware of the resolution pretty much. As I said, these are the ones that for me work best. But your imagination is the limit. And what I already shared on Instagram as well, and which I'm going to make a tutorial about kind of soonish, is that you can kind of integrate this into feedback loops as well. So the output that's coming out here, you can technically send back, as I think also did in the Stable Diffusion video, and then you can kind of create feedback loops using AI, and I think that's just absolutely fascinating. But yeah, let's go back to Graffiti here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And thank you so much to everybody who's supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next video.